an important part of the process, but so is the advisor. And I would like you all to start thinking this is a mindset thing, and it's not arrogant, it's confidence. And it's this knowledge, this belief that ultimately what we do changes people's lives. And we must not lose sight of that fact. The very first sale I ever made, the very first case I ever wrote, was after 2 years of failing in this business. And I eventually sold an insurance policy to my stepfather, who was the breadwinner in the family. And just 2 months after he bought the insurance policy, he died. He was my first client. He was my first claim. Ultimately, I believe that we change people's lives. And I know you all share that view. So here's the thing. If we feel that way genuinely, we must sit with a new prospect and believe in our minds that they need us more than we need them. They need us more than we need them. That's number one. Number two, if we focus on the process, that is communicating effectively and taking clients on a journey to a decision that starts with education. Education leads to empowerment. Empowerment leads to a decision the client can make together with their advisor. And once they make that decision, they stick with it, which of course helps things like persistency and being able to grow a very, very robust, financially successful business in the future. So there's a number of ways that I will position myself. One way is not simply to come up with, I'm a financial advisor. I'll give you an example why that's not always the right thing to say. Let's imagine I meet a 70-year-old gentleman. He's wearing a very nice wristwatch. He's wearing a smart suit. It seems obvious to me that he's pretty wealthy. Now, if I say to a 70-year-old with plenty of money, I'm a financial advisor, in his mind, he's probably thinking, I don't need a financial advisor. But on the basis, and this is the next thing I would like you all to remember, write down, etch it in your mind forever, is that your clients are only interested in three things. I'm going to tell you what those are in a moment. And if you can satisfy one, two, or ideally all three of those objectives, you will develop an amazing relationship with that individual. The other thing we're going to talk about is what happens at the first meeting, because at the first meeting, part of the prospecting toolkit that we're going to be talking about today is to get referrals without asking for referrals. So we're going to look at the traditional way of prospecting, that is engaging with someone for the first time when they say something like, what do you do? And when someone says to me, what do you do? And that person happens to be 70 years old and wealthy, I might be saying, I help people to preserve their wealth, to pass it on to their loved ones in an efficient way. In this man's mind, he will be thinking, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I will be saying something very different to a young family, for example. And as many of you who know me, and I know a number of you, will know I work in the sports star, celebrity, and high net worth business market. And that happened because of the prospecting idea that I used to a Premiership footballer the very first time I met the Premiership footballer. I was invited to his wedding as a guest of the bride. And inevitably, as we were introduced, he said to me, what do you do for a living? That is the question that we all want to avoid. But what I said to him was, I help footballers, soccer players, to achieve the one thing that most of them fear. And he said, what's that exactly? And I said, you get to the end of your career, 12 or 15 years, if you're really lucky, and then you fall off the edge of the financial cliff, the precipice. You have been used to earning really good money, living a great life. And then at the end of it all, it stops. And there is no obvious way of replacing that income. And he said, you know what? That is exactly what most footballers worry about. So I said, well, that's what I do. And he said, let's have a conversation when we get back from honeymoon. He became my very first client. We didn't talk about financial planning. I never used the word financial advisor. All I showed him was that by investing some of his income, he could grow funds that would then allow him to draw down and replace some or all of his income when he retired. And he, of course, introduced me to many, many other players, so much so that we now have 45 Premiership footballers as clients. Now, I'm not telling you that to impress you. I'm telling you that to impress upon you that sometimes the language just needs to be carefully thought through. So you can't go into a new situation, meeting a new prospect, without having thought about the different responses you might give to different people. So let's now develop this idea of positioning, because it is your best friend. It will be the best piece of kit in your toolkit if you focus on getting this bit right. The three things I shared with you a moment ago, that there were three things that every prospect that you ever meet will be interested in. And it is only three things. Those three things are that they are interested only in themselves, their problems, and their objectives. Themselves, their problems, and their objectives, their goals, if you like. If you can satisfy one, two, or all three of those things, you will have a client for life. By engaging with someone, asking the right questions, that's understanding a little bit about themselves. And I'll give you some real life examples in a moment. But most people are really only interested in, I have a problem, help me solve it. Or I have a goal or an objective, I want to achieve it. And that, as financial professionals, is our role. It is our responsibility. The question is, how do we engage with someone? How do we get them working with us in such a way that not only do they want to become a client, they also want to introduce many other people as well? And just before I share with you these ideas, I want you to know that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, because in my business, we do not seek any new clients. They all come by referral or recommendation, either from existing clients, from new clients, or from professional people like lawyers, accountants, and so on. And we'll develop that idea shortly. So I'm going to deal with this as a most basic principle first, because I know that many of you, especially if you're new in the business, many of you, if you're anything like me, were given a list, a piece of paper. And I was asked when I was 21 to write down a list of all the people that I knew. We called it a Project 100 back in the day. The problem was, as a 21-year-old, I didn't know more than about 13 people. And when I started to write down the names of my pet animals at home, I realized I had a prospecting problem, except that it wasn't a prospecting problem. It was an activity problem. And I know all of us are encouraged to speak to friends and family. And I know pretty much to a man and woman, we say, oh, I think it's really difficult approaching my mother, my father, my siblings, my best friend, a former colleague. 6 months ago, I was a teacher and now I'm working at Prudential. How do I start that conversation? And I agree that if you approach things in a very transactional way, if they see themselves as someone who is simply going to add another sale to your list, I agree, those conversations are very difficult. The conversations are difficult with any prospect if that's the way you approach it. But the reason why I eventually took on my stepfather as a client is not because I'd learned anything new or I came up with any fancy words. It was because I simply said, after 2 years of procrastinating, 2 years of making excuses, listening to the little voice in my head saying, today's not the day, why don't you have the conversation tomorrow? And of course, tomorrow never came. But eventually, all I focused on was the process. And the process for me was, it would be remiss of me. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and it would be wrong of me. It would be remiss of me if I did not at least speak to you about things like insurance. You are the breadwinner in the family. And if anything happened to you, Dave, that was his name, if anything happened to you, then the family would have a similar problem to the one that was left by my father when he died, a very, very successful businessman, but no financial plan in place. So my job is not to sell anything. My job is only to communicate, to share with passion and enthusiasm what I do. And once I started to share my message, not worrying about the outcome, everything transformed in my business. So if you find a face-to-face conversation difficult, maybe a text message or an email. I prefer the face-to-face, but sometimes being very authentic about things by saying, look, I've been struggling with this in my mind for a while. I didn't really know what to say, but my obligation is to my family, to my friends, to my former colleagues. Because if I focus on sharing with you what I know, as a result of a coffee, a conversation, you will be better off for having had that conversation with me. Even if we don't do anything, if I don't take you on as a client, or if we decide not to work together for any reason, I will still have done my job. My job is not the outcome. My job is the process. So with friends and family, I think it's just about sharing with authenticity the fact that your job is to share with them information that might make them financially more successful. And by the way, that lovely line, making people financially more successful, is a really good one to use if you don't really know very much about the prospect. So someone says to you, what do you do for a living? But you don't know that they're wealthy. You don't know that they run a business. You don't know that they've just inherited a lot of money. What you then say as a general catch-all, if you like, is I help people become financially more successful. The moment I mention prudential or financial advisor with great respect, the perception is, oh, this is a conversation to avoid because this person wants to sell to me. So try to think of words, phrases that will naturally engage someone. That is the basic principle of prospecting. Now what we'll do is we'll explore the different ways to build relationships across a multitude of different opportunities in the marketplace. Now, I use this word. I appreciate that from wherever you're based, wherever you work, wherever you live, many of you will not have a local Starbucks. But Starbucks is a great prospecting place, but it could be any kind of coffee shop. It could be any kind of retail store. But coffee tends to be a place where a lot of people congregate. And those people, because I know many of you stand at subway stations and on street corners with sandwich boards, and that's amazing. But that is a very transactional approach. We are hoping on a numbers basis that people will come up to us eventually and say, actually, I would quite like to talk about life insurance, which is great, but it's not a particularly effective way of using time, I don't think. If that's what you find works successfully for you, don't let me change anything that you're doing. But let me share with you a story from many years ago. And I was in Starbucks, but it could be any kind of coffee shop. I happened to be in Starbucks. I was driving home after a long day of seeing clients, and I was stood in the line about to purchase my regular cup of black Americano. And as I got my credit card out to pay for my coffee, the gentleman behind me in the line said, I will pay for his coffee. And he was talking about me. Now, of course, the natural skeptic in me, in any human being, was this is rather unusual. I'm not sure that this is what normally happens in a Starbucks. And of course, that prompted me to say to this gentleman, that's very kind of you, but do you mind me asking why you're buying me a Starbucks? And he said, well, many years ago, I was where you are stood in the line, and a lady behind me said the same thing. She said, let me buy this man a coffee. And she bought me a coffee. I asked her the same question. Why are you buying me a coffee? And she said, because someone had done the same for her. But with every purchased coffee, there had to be one commitment, one promise. And the promise was, and what he said to me was, I simply want you to promise that within 24 hours, you will buy someone else a coffee. In other words, you will pay that kindness forward to another human being, make the world a better place. And I said, great, what a lovely idea. I will surely do that. And so I made a commitment that within 24 hours, I would buy someone else a coffee. And that's exactly what I did. And that person, of course, then turned to me and said, do you mind me asking why you're buying a coffee? And then went on to say, what do you do for a living? And of course, I was able to share with them in exactly the same way as I've just outlined, a couple of phrases that got them saying, that's interesting. How do you help people become financially more successful? And over the last 7 years that I have been buying people Starbucks coffees, and by the way, I'm not buying them every day, just every now and again, if there happens to be someone in the line in front of me and I think, oh, this will be a good conversation to strike up, I buy them a coffee. And of the 70 plus coffees that I've purchased, I've acquired 48 new clients. Why? Because most people, deep down, although they may not be philanthropic in the sense that they give money away, many people love the idea. And of course, it reflects well on you as a person who is fundamentally kind and thoughtful. It's a very good way of starting a relationship. So even in a place like Starbucks, it's really easy to start a conversation if you approach things in the right way. And of course, you are confident in the way that you present what it is that you do for a living. I'd now like to, because I know many of you are very, very active on social media. I'm going to share with you, firstly, a common mistake that many people make when trying to engage with other people on social media. And I'm going to give you the solution as to how to do it very, very effectively. Now, this poor lady, I say poor lady because I picked Nadine Sinclair. When she contacted me many years ago on social media, I was chuckling I was laughing to myself when I received this message because what Nadine Sinclair, and by the way, she's into neuro leadership, whatever that means, which makes me think that she probably does understand a little bit about human psychology, but clearly that is not the case because she gets absolutely every rule wrong here. What she says is, hi, Sandro, hope all is well. I was checking out your profile and noticed we shared a mutual connection. We don't know who that person is. I'm looking to grow my network. And as soon as I read the words, I'm looking to grow my network, I thought to myself, This isn't about me. This is about Nadine. So when you communicate with anyone, social media, face to face, don't make it about you. If you want to grow your network, find other ways to do it. But Nadine Sinclair is not going to, most of the time, click accept connection if you are simply talking about the benefit that she brings to you. It must always be about the benefit to her. And of course, I hit delete. I've never connected with Nadine, but of course, not before I took a screen grab and shared it with all of you. So that's the mistake that many, many people make. Now, on the other hand, let's have a look at when it does work. This particular lady, her name is Laura. Laura is a very, very successful lawyer in the UK. Now, I generate a lot of business from other professionals, and this is one of the ways that I build those relationships. So Laura was very active on Instagram. She was constantly telling the world how good she was, what amazing clients she had, how many awards she'd won. So, a fair bit of self-marketing going on. But what's interesting is that so many people had this perception that Laura, a very successful lawyer with some incredible clients, must already be working with an advisor. Just like many people in my town when I grew up, financial advisors, thought that my father, a very successful business owner, must already be getting advice, must already have a will, must already have his plans in place. And of course, that wasn't the case. My father was too busy growing a business, didn't know anything about financial planning, didn't have a plan, died. My mother lost everything within 2 years. So having learned that lesson, and that goes back to what I said about friends and family, don't presuppose. In fact, don't presuppose with anyone that they have a plan, even if they have an existing advisor. And that is an objection that we'll talk about when I see you on the 18th. Common objections are smokescreens. They are an attempt to deflect or defer the real issues, but we'll solve those together in a couple of weeks. For me, I wanted to do a couple of things with Laura. One, I wanted to create empathy. I wanted to create a connection. And the way to create empathy is to find common ground. Now, she'd won some awards. I've won some awards. Many of you will have won awards. So there for me was my obvious opportunity. And we have very similar clients. Now, Laura is in the business, exactly the same business as me. Now, she's a lawyer. I'm a financial professional, but we are in the same business. It's called the prospecting business. Laura is always looking for new clients, as I am always looking for new clients. So I need to find a way to engage with Laura in a way that creates some connections between us, but also helps Laura to identify that I could be a good resource for her. So I go on to talk about the fact that I'm looking for really good lawyers. She happens to be a divorce lawyer. I'm looking for really good lawyers to introduce my clients because unfortunately, my clients, like all of yours, do get divorced every now and again, and they will often ask me for a referral to a good lawyer. So I simply set that out, looking for or allowing Laura to see that there's an opportunity to engage with me. I always finish my messages with best wishes, Sandro, and then in brackets, my family name. The reason I do that is because Sandro alone is too familiar. Mr. Forte is too formal. So Sandro is how I want her to refer to me when we engage. Forte is the formal bit to let her know that I don't want to be too informal, as of course Nadine was. It took Laura just 8 minutes to reply. Now, this is a very successful woman with, self-confessed multiple clients across lots of industries, all very wealthy. And it took her just 8 minutes to reply. She simply said, thanks so much for reaching out. Your page and podcast, I had a podcast back then. I'd love to meet up. Let me know some dates and wear suits. Now, for those of you, I deliberately didn't mention this, but for those of you on the last slide that were eagle-eyed, you will have seen that I finished my message by when in the next couple of months might you be available for a meeting. Now, I say the next couple of months because the other perception about our business is if you say to all of your prospects, I'm available whenever you want me to see you, a prospect says, can we meet tomorrow? And you say, yes, no problem. What time? Subconsciously, you are creating this idea that you are not very busy. And therefore, by definition, you are not very successful. Now, I'm also not saying that we should defer every meeting to try and help people think that we're successful. What I am saying is we should not allow prospects to choose when they meet with us. I want Laura to know that I'm busy. I've got some time in the next couple of months. But what I don't do is I don't have time tomorrow or probably even in the next week. I want her to know I'm busy. Now, as it happened, she contacted me and said, let's meet. and we arranged a time to meet about 2.5 weeks later. But I don't want to betray the fact that I'm not very busy by saying to someone, when shall we meet? I'm free and available anytime. Even if you have an empty diary, do not allow yourself to fall into that trap. So looking at social media, looking at engaging with friends and family, looking at engaging with the high net worth marketplace, with business owners. And by the way, with business owners, we are adopting the same 3 principles. Business owners, just like any other kind of client or prospect, are interested in themselves, they're interested in their problems, they're interested in their objectives. What are a business owner's objectives? Well, for most business owners that I know, they want to increase the top line, that is, increase revenue. They want to try and decrease costs so that they are more profitable. And almost every business owner I've ever met wants to sell their business at a profit in the future so that they can retire on the proceeds. So if I go in as a financial advisor and I don't speak to them like a business owner, and by the way, every single person on this call today, to a greater or lesser extent, is a business owner. So let's start talking to business owners like business owners. Let's start talking to parents like a parent. If we talk the same language, we create the empathy. And when we create empathy, we are 7/8 of the way to achieving a great outcome. So general rules around social media, all detailed on that screen for you. I'm not going to go into too much detail. That is your takeaway. Everyone will get a copy of this recording, and I imagine a copy of the slides. If you have any questions, you can, of course, come back to me. But basically, the standard way of approaching people, it doesn't work. I don't think it's ever worked. And I've got 2 years of failure to prove that it doesn't work. On the other hand, if we start really focusing on the needs of the other person, and we say, my primary job is to help you make the right financial decisions, and you'll see how this manifests itself in the first meeting in a moment, you are going to really get the prospect thinking, this is the person that I want to build a relationship with. Remember, the reciprocal benefit, that is the benefit to all of us, comes when we go through that process of engagement and we eventually get to the outcome. The outcome, by the way, is a natural byproduct of the process. Okay, let's look at, if the slide changes. Okay, let's look at, before we get to the first meeting, let's talk about how we approach people. Now, whether this is on the telephone, whether this is face-to-face, there is a 6-step process I would like to share with you. And although you'll get a copy of the slides, if anyone wants the script, I can make it available to Prudential. There is a script that accompanies this. Let me just take you through the process. Now, if you learn this, if you stick with it, you can use your own words, your own language. That's absolutely fine. I'm not asking you to use my language because I appreciate there will be cultural and geographical differences. But the first mistake that many advisors make when they engage with someone on social media, over the telephone, face-to-face, and it's a basic rule of prospecting, is that we start by throwing ourselves into the conversation by telling people what we do. Now, going back to what I said earlier about taking control of the relationship, what I mean by that is always being one step ahead. What we don't want to be is one step behind. If we are one step behind, we get lots of questions, and very often those questions are objections. To eliminate objections, which we will explore in more detail in 2 weeks' time, we need to stay one step ahead. And so we always want the prospect, when we're engaging with them for the first time, to be constantly wanting more information. Tell me more about that. Give me more information. That's interesting. Can you explain that in a bit more detail? That's the level of control that I'm talking about. So when we introduce ourselves, typically when I'm telephoning someone, now I'm a 58-year-old Gen Xer, so I still use the telephone to communicate with people. I appreciate many people use WhatsApp or Line or whatever it happens to be, but whatever form of communication you use, the same principles apply. The first one is to introduce, but before you introduce yourself, then you need to make sure, of course, you're talking to the right person and that now is a good time to engage with them. Because if they say, for example, no, now is not a good time, I'm quite busy, I would normally then just say, no problem, I'll call you later or first thing tomorrow morning. I haven't introduced myself at this stage, and I've done that deliberately because I don't want that person to reject me before I get the opportunity to tell them what it is that I'm calling about. Now, if they say I'm too busy and I say, no problem, I'll call you later, because I haven't introduced myself at this stage, they are going to be thinking, I wonder who it was that called me. When they hear my voice again later on or the following day, they are slightly more likely to be a bit more intrigued, a bit more engaged. When I introduce myself, the other thing that I want to do is I want to humanize. And what I mean by humanize is introducing the third person. So typically, because all of my business is done by introduction or referral by another name, one of the things that I want to do is I want to make sure that I move the prospect away from their natural tendency to say, I'm not interested. Because most people's default position is to say, I'm not interested the moment they hear the word prudential or the moment they hear the word financial advisor. So when I humanize, I'm going to introduce a third person. Let me just use Shameen from Prudential as an example. So let's imagine I'm talking to Doreen, for example. I would say, hello, is that Doreen? Doreen, sorry to call you out of the blue like this. Just approaching lunchtime. I appreciate you might be busy. Is now a good time to speak? She will say yes. If she says no, I'm excusing myself and calling back later. But let's imagine she says yes. Hi, Doreen. Now, there's two different approaches here. Approach number one, which is the standard approach, the one that most of us use, is I would normally say something like, my name is Sandro Forte from Prudential, and I wait for a response. And Doreen will say, I'm not interested, or actually I have to run out, or before you go any further, I already have an advisor. Because in her mind, this is a sales call, in her mind. Whether we've got something that we could share with her that could completely transform her life, in her mind, she has a perception that we have to overcome. That's where most advisors go wrong. Now let's roll it with the second option, which is only fractionally different, but the outcome is completely different. Now, instead of saying, my name is Sandro Forte from Prudential, and waiting for the inevitable, I'm not interested response, I'm going to say, my name is Sandro Forte from Prudential, and I was speaking with our mutual friend Shameen yesterday. Shameen has recently become a client of mine. She mentioned your name as someone that I might be able to help in the same way that I've helped her. Now, the focus is on Shameen, the third person, the referrer. Now, if some of you are cold calling, you don't have Shameen to call on, but you might say something like, is that Doreen? Yes, it is. Doreen, my name is Sandro Forte from Prudential, and I work with other business owners just like you in the local area. I've been able to help a number of the others. I'm hoping that I can help you in exactly the same way. So I'm still using the same words, but what I'm changing slightly is the fact that I don't have the third person, the Shameen, if you like, to call on. But because Doreen is now focusing on Shameen, she's thinking, well, if there's some kind of benefit to Shameen, I need more information. I need to know, I need to gather more detail. And that's what prompts them to say something like, okay, give me a bit more information, or okay, please continue, please tell me a little bit more about what you do. That then moves me to the message. So my key message is I want it to be very, very simple. I want it to be very concise. And so I'm going to say something like, I focus on helping people like Shameen become financially more successful. Is financial success something that is important to you, your business, your family, Doreen? Doreen is probably going to say, yes, it is. If she says, as I expect, yes, it is, I'm then going to move to step number 5. I'm not moving to number 4. I'm moving to number 5 because number 5 is the invitation to meet. I call it the hotel question. The hotel question, it doesn't have to be a hotel. It could be Prudential offices. It could be the home of the individual. Wherever you prefer to meet, I then go on. In my case, I meet at a private members club, typically in London. So I would then say, great, Shameen, in that case, why don't we meet at the Ivy Club? I can look at a date in a couple of weeks, either on Tuesday morning or Thursday afternoon. And she will say, okay, one of those is convenient or one of those is not convenient. But ultimately, we will then arrange the meeting. That's what I want to achieve. That is my ideal. If she says yes, we fix the meeting. And then step number 6 is what I call trivia. Trivia is, so may I just confirm that I do have your correct information? Please allow me to share mine with you. And then what I'm going to do, Shameen, I will call you a day or two before our meeting just to check everything is okay. And the day before the meeting, let's continue this theme now of not allowing the prospect to be in charge, to come up with an objection. The day before, typically, I will call Shameen or I will SMS. If you prefer that, it's fine. But instead of saying, hi, Shameen, this is Sandro. Are you okay to meet with me tomorrow? Because it's a yes or no question. If I say, are you still okay to meet with me tomorrow? She is either going to say yes, great, or she will say, oh, sorry, something's come up, I can't meet now. On the other hand, I should be saying, hi, Shameen, this is Sandro. I'm just calling to remind you, I'm really looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Or I'm just calling to let you know, I'm really, really looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. That is a statement. It's not a question. And it then becomes much more difficult for Shameen to say, actually, I can't meet. If she does say that, there's a very good possibility that it is slightly more genuine than if she uses the typical excuses that many people do. Now, I'm deliberately not going to deal with part number 4, because to get the answers to part number 4, that is dealing with all the objections that one may get, which is, I already have an advisor, I'm too busy, can you email me the information, I'm shopping around, and all the other hundreds, if not thousands of different variations of the objections that we've all had from time to time. I will be dealing with those in a couple of weeks' time. But I promise you, we will deal with absolutely every conceivable objection that you may come across as a professional. The first meeting, I believe this is your best prospecting tip of the day. Now, many people wouldn't necessarily think that this is a great place to generate new business opportunity, but I believe it is the most important part of the process. And a bit like what I said earlier, if there is one skill you pick up today to support this idea, this general theory that people need us more than we need them, the one skill I would strongly recommend that you develop is the way you control the first meeting. This will determine not just whether the client becomes a prospect becomes a client, it will determine how many referrals you get from them, and it will determine a number of other things like average case size and the relationship you can build with other professionals as well. Your fact find is your best friend. But before you get to the fact find, the rules of engagement must be very clearly set out. So let me share with you what those rules are. Now, there's a very important word. It's 2 letters long. It's really easy to remember, but I'm going to strongly recommend that every one of you starts using this word regularly, more regularly than you do right now. And it is the word we. The word we is an incredibly strong, powerful word if you're looking to build a relationship with a new prospect, because too many advisors, they talk about you and I, and that is much more transactional. We means we collaborate. We means we make decisions together. We means we buy the policy together. We means we seek referrals together. Everything is much more about the collaboration rather than a you and me transaction. So when I meet somebody for the first time, I want to establish the rules of engagement. Now, I call them rules, but they are more reasons than rules. So when I'm meeting, and I'll use Shameen again, I'm meeting with Shameen for the first time. Hi, Shameen. It's really nice of Doreen to introduce us. Great to meet you. Thanks so much for finding the time today. Now, before we go any further, Shameen, I believe there are a couple of reasons, 2 main reasons why we are meeting today. Reason number 1, we need to make a decision together as to whether there is an opportunity to work together to help you achieve your objectives. I'm using language that you can dissect, you can create whatever you like from this, but we are meeting, I believe, Shameen, to see whether or not we can build a relationship and whether we can go on to help you achieve your objectives. And of course, that relationship depends on things like, do we like each other? Do we trust each other? Ultimately, do we see this as being a long-term thing? The second reason we are meeting is I need to see, Shameen, whether I can help you or not. Now, at the moment, I don't know whether I can or whether I can't, but what I'm going to do with your permission is I'm going to ask you lots of questions, gather lots of information, and that will help me to determine whether or not I can be of value. Now, obviously, Shameen, the more information you give me, the more I can help you. Now, the reason I say that is because I don't want Shameen to think to herself, well, I've got $100,000 in my bank account. I'm not sure I want to give all that information. I'd rather just let him know I have a small amount. And so prospects, unfortunately, do make a habit regularly of not quite giving us all the information that we ask for. When we make the benefit about them, they give us the information. Because what I'm saying is that the more information you give me, the better the information you give me, the better the advice I can give you in return. Is that okay? Does that make sense, Shameen? And is that okay? Does that make sense? Are 2 great examples of what we call a logical question. If you ask a logical question, the answer will always be yes. So when you make a statement that is obvious and logical, and you follow that up with, is that okay? Does that make sense? How does that sound? the answer will always be yes. That makes perfect sense. So the first two things I want to establish are the reasons we're meeting. Number one, do we like each other? Do we trust each other? Can we work together? Use that word we. Secondly, can I help you? I don't know, but the more information you give me, the better the advice I can give you. That is a simple decision that Shameen then has to make. No one wants quite good advice. No one wants average advice. So the better the information she gives me, the better the advice I give her in return. Now, there's another couple of things that we have the opportunity to do. I was 21 when I started, and so I knew my age was a problem because the perception might have been that I was young and inexperienced and I didn't have the knowledge to share. So if you regularly come into other challenges at this point in the meeting, deal with them. This is the time to deal with the potential objections. So it might be that you are young, in which case, like me, you say, now, before we go any further, before I start asking questions, just one other thing to cover. And that is, I know that you are both thinking, I look very young. And many people, when they look at someone who is young, think he doesn't have much experience. Allow me to tell you that I've passed all my exams. I'm equally well qualified to any of my colleagues. But the one benefit you get if you deal with me is that you benefit from long-term service because I'm so young. Now, my prospects used to laugh when I told them that, but actually there was a very important message underneath it, which is all good financial plans are those that are stuck to by a prospect in the long term. Otherwise, it's a transaction. The other thing you might want to deal with is the way you get paid. So, Shameen, before we go any further, let me explain. I only get paid if we decide to do business together. And the we decide to do business together lets her know that subconsciously, I get to choose whether I work with her in exactly the same way that she gets to choose whether she works with me. Really, really important subconscious messages that let people know that you are equally in charge of the process. So that's my first meeting. Now, the other part that I want to talk about in the first meeting is how you get referrals. Now, I was always told that, and referrals, let's be honest, it's the lifeblood of our business, right? It is the foundation of all successful things in our business. The more referrals we get, the more active we are, and the more active we are, the more successful, as long as we have all the other relevant skills. So I'm going to suggest that the first meeting is the time that you should be getting between 2 and 6 new client introductions, referrals by another name. Now, the place to ask for referrals, or rather position referrals, I was always told the best time to get a referral was at the point of sale. The client is signing on the application form, and that's when I jump in and I say, so Shameen, great to be working with you. I'm so delighted that we've decided that we can move things forward. And by the way, Shameen, if there's anyone else you can think of that would benefit from talking about life insurance or whatever it is that we've just done, you could introduce them to me. And Shameen would say, I can't think of anyone right now, or let me think about it. And that's a problem for many advisors. And it doesn't really help with the prospecting and the referral system that we need to grow our business. Now, on the other hand, when you get to the point in the fact find where, for example, you are talking about what happens, Shameen, if you don't come home from work today, you very sadly pass away. What happens to your family since you are the breadwinner? Now, she will say, well, that would be a big problem. Okay, let me just ask you, Shameen, who would be responsible for the administration of your estate? That is, taking care of all your financial matters. She says, well, I guess that would be my mother and father. Okay, who would look after your 2 young children? Well, I guess the guardians would be my brother and sister-in-law. Okay, so we've got mum and dad, we've got brother and sister-in-law, and then, of course, your 2 young children. So these are all people who would be affected by your death. She says, yes. Okay, Shameen, if we decide to work together, if we take you through a process and we reach the point where we agree on a financial planning strategy for you, I will need to meet mum and dad. I will need to meet brother and sister-in-law. Why? Because these people are all involved in the process. They need to know who I am. They need to know where the insurance policy is, how to claim. They need to know how the money gets distributed and spent. These are all people that are part of a holistic financial plan. Otherwise, once again, it is a transaction. Now, if I'm sharing this with Shameen as a benefit to Shameen, she will say, okay, let me introduce you to mum, dad, brother, sister-in-law. So I'm not asking for referrals. I'm letting her know that if we go on to do business, I will need to at least speak to these people. She will say, well, do I get involved in the meeting? You don't have to. If you want to, that's fine. And by the way, the meeting is only brief. It's, hello, mum, dad. This is who I am. we are currently in the process of putting a financial plan together for your daughter. If anything should happen, I'm your initial point of contact. Now, mum and dad may say, great, no problem. Thank you. Nice to meet you. And that's all I need to do. I haven't won their business. They're not new clients, but I'm still doing a much more comprehensive job for Shameen. They might say, actually, our financial advisor's never done this for us before, or we don't have a financial plan of our own. Could we talk to you? It is a complete no-lose situation. So with all of that said, I'm going to hand back over to your wonderful MC. My 50 minutes or so is up, but I know that a lot of you have some questions, which I want to make sure I have time to answer. So I'm going to hand back to Johnny, and I will be happy to answer any questions. Johnny?
And I am back. Thank you so much, Sandro, for that wonderful session, wonderful presentation as well. Everybody, can you just do us a favor and just go to your reaction buttons on the chat as well to show Sandro